Alrighty, so welcome back to another News of the Week episode. So today, well, the most anticipated news of this offseason has finally been revealed. As today, the league has officially announced the season home opener for all 27 teams, and I am definitely going to be doing a video later today looking at every single team and what their season home opener and who they're going to be facing in their season home opener. But there are some good news and bad news when I look at all the season home opener. The good news is that it seemed like the league has kind of rewarded me for all the hard work I've been doing in terms of these MLS content in the off season, and they give me the first two matchup of this season that's going to be involving my favorite team, that is the San Jose Earthquakes and Minnesota United. But the bad news is it's who they're going to be facing in those first two matches of this upcoming season. That makes me kind of feel frustrating because one, both of these teams are going to be on the road, and two, the very first matchup is going to be between the Quakes and the Houston Dynamo, and weirdly that game is not national televised, even though that's the first game of the season. And as much as I know that sounds like an easy matchup for the Quakes, as they're going to be playing against a Dynamo team that a lot of people regard that they're kind of on a rebuilding year this season and not expect to make the playoffs, the Quakes always tends to struggle when they play against the Dynamo at BBVA Compass Stadium. Like, no matter if the Dynamo is good or they are terrible, for whatever reason, the Quakes never are able to head to BBVA Compass Stadium to play against the Dynamo and walk out there with all 3 points. And then Minnesota gets the honor of playing against the Seattle Sounders on the road for the first game of the season, and that's also the first game that's going to be national televised of this season, as that one is going to be on FS1. And you know, I knew that game was probably going to be on national televised game because, you know, that's the rematch of the Western Conference final. Surely that has to be on national televised, but I didn't know that it was going to be this soon that the rematch is going to happen. And as I said before, over and under, I'm going to say there probably is going to be at least 5 times that both John Strong or Stu Houghton is going to mention that Western Conference final. And although this might be a great memory for all you Seattle Sounders fans, yeah, this is going to be a living hell for Minnesota fans, and that's going to be something that, you know, the only thing I can be happy about that is that if the Loons do walk out with a win and is a really huge kind of words and kind of should be put in quotation mark, because I know the Loons do not do well against the Sounders, whether they're playing at home or away, but they do walk out with a win, then I do feel much more satisfied, and at least we kind of had some revenge against them in the Western Conference final. And I also want to put kind of in quotation mark too, because really, even though if Minnesota do beat Seattle in that game, I mean, it's a good way to kind of avenge our loss in the Western Conference final. But at the end of the day, that Western Conference final loss, as I mentioned, will always be in the history book, and it's going to be something that, unfortunately, as Minnesota fans, I'm gonna have to live with that for the rest of our history. Now, moving on, in terms of the next news, involved Toronto FC, and you wonder, heading into this preseason, and the fact that, is there going to be a chance where there's going to be a team that unfortunately will have to stop their preseason because there's going to be multiple players or multiple member of the team that's going to be tested positive for COVID-19? And it seemed like the answer is pretty much yes, because TFC unfortunately had the undubious honor to be that team that unfortunately have to stop preseason because multiple member of the team was tested positive for COVID-19. Now, what's going to be interesting about this is that I wonder, does this potentially delay the Canadian Championship, which still, to this day, they still have not announced when exactly it is going to take place, although I heard there's rumors that it could be taking place on March 19th, but given this whole situation, is there a chance where that could potentially be pushed back? And if it is going to be pushed back, it's definitely going to be pushed back, not like in a significant amount of days, because that game has to be played before CCL has happened, as that's really the only matchup that still haven't determined the final team that is going to be part of CCL heading into this upcoming season. But yeah, you know, for TFC, unfortunately, they're going to have to stop their preseason training maybe a couple of days, but hopefully once they do get back to preseason training, they can get themselves back up to speed to play in that Canadian Championship game against Forge FC that hopefully will happen in the next week or so. Now, moving on in terms of the next news is Christian Pavone. So I think this might be the last time I'm going to be mentioning Pavone, because I know throughout this whole offseason I've been following closely in terms of the whole Christian Pavone saga of whether or not if he's going to be signing with the Galaxy or is he going to be staying with Boca Junior. Well, it seems like most likely he's going to be staying in Boca Junior, but at the same time, probably he's not going to be staying at Boca Junior too, because now there is report that says that he has been charged with rape in Argentina, and that he could potentially be found guilty of that, as in a couple of days he's going to be testifying in an Argentine court to see whether or not he of course was charged with rape and committed that crime. But either way, this is definitely something that will seriously damage Christian Pavone's career, but also make the decision much more easier for the Galaxy to decide whether or not if they're going to still pursue Pavone and bring him back to the team. I mean, anytime when you have a guy that just got charged with domestic violence, most likely you're not going to pursue him anymore. And I would also say that the Galaxy kind of dodged a huge bullet in terms of this, because imagine if they actually did sign Pavone this off season and they decided to acquire him back in January. Well, not only the fact that they're going to have to deal with him unfortunately suffering an injury to his leg, and he also had surgery on both of his legs during this off season, and he could potentially be out for the first couple of weeks of the season. But can you imagine now they have to deal with a guy that of course was charged with domestic violence in his home country, and that they pretty much are forced to release him no matter if he actually is found guilty or innocent of the charge, and they basically just wasted a ton of money for that. Like, that could have been the most costly kind of acquisition the Galaxy would be making, even more costly than when they got Chicharito last season, because even though I know as bad as Chicharito was last season, at least he regularly played for the Galaxy, and he was able to score goals, and doesn't end up to be the same case as Pavone, that unfortunately will probably be no longer part of this Galaxy team if he was going to be signed with this team because of this whole domestic violence situation. But yeah, I'll probably still kind of follow closely in terms of what will happen to Pavone and whether or not if he is going to be charged. But one thing for sure is that the Galaxy is probably no longer going to be interested in him, and now it's going to be interesting to see who they're going to be finding as a replacement for him. Now, moving on in terms of the next news, and talk about some of the signings that has happened in the past couple of days. Well, Atlanta seems to they play some 4D chess in terms of some of the moves that they made in the past couple of days, because they of course were able to acquire Andrew Gutman permanently from Celtic after FC Cincinnati decided to not sign him permanently, and Gutman is now back with Celtic. But now these past couple of days, Atlanta was able to acquire him and acquired the full rights for him. But then immediately when they were able to sign him from Celtic permanently, they loaned him to the New York Red Bulls in exchange for a 2024 third-round pick. And, obviously there's a lot to pack in terms of this, but a simple way to say this is basically Atlanta was able to get Gutman from Celtic, and then they immediately loaned him to another club in exchange for a 2024 third-round pick, which is pretty much a useless kind of return that Atlanta was able to get, because not only the fact that I mentioned before how the Super Draft has really kind of lost its luster in the past couple of years, but a third-round pick, very few players are able to be a regular and make their name in MLS from that deep of a draft pick. Now there's also a bonus where if Gutman does meet the performance that Atlanta thinks that he's going to do when he was going on loan with the Red Bulls, then the Red Bulls could hand $50,000 general allocation money to Atlanta. But either way, that's still not that much of a money, and it'll be interesting to see how he's going to do do with the Red Bulls, and that, you know, of all the complication of this deal, I didn't see anything about potential option to buy where, you know, if Gutman does go to the Red Bulls and he does well with that club, the Red Bulls might be negotiating with Atlanta and potentially get him outright, and probably will never see him in a 5-stripe jersey if that is going to be the case. But yeah, we'll see whether or not if Gutman is going to do well with the Red Bulls. And it's also kind of interesting why the Red Bulls decided to sign another fullback, because when you look at the depth chart of the team, the fullback position is a position that clearly they don't really need because there's so many need depth in terms of that spot. And I think they're like the only MLS team in the league that actually have legitimate good depth in terms of the fullback position, because usually I know for a lot of teams, fullbacks depth is always one of the big issue that a lot of these team had, and a lot of these teams always have trouble in terms of finding a decent fullback. But that's not the case for the Red Bulls, as they have pretty much not only 2 deep in terms of that position, but they may be 3 or even 4 deep after they were able to acquire Andrew Gutman from Atlanta. Now, moving on in terms of the next news, and speaking of fullback, the Vancouver Whitecaps were able to acquire fullback Bruno Gasper from Sporting CP, and I think I kind of mentioned this in the last news of the week, well, not the last news of the week, but one of the news of the week, I talked about how he's going to be coming to the Whitecaps, and that it's going to be $1.5 million that they were going to pay. Well, that price actually have drive up to $1.75 million, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not if he's going to be a starter for this team. I know there are a couple of Sporting CP fans says that he wasn't really that good with the club, and therefore that's why they decided to sell him for such a low amount of fees. But at the same time, we've seen before where even though players struggle to play for a big team in Europe, when they come to MLS, they can definitely thrive from that struggle, and that the Whitecaps are probably hoping the same case, where even though he struggled with one of the best team in Portugal, if he does come to MLS, he's going to do much better and provide some good depth in terms of the fullback position for the Whitecaps. Now, speaking of depth, the Columbus Crew continue to add more players, and you know, I talk about how they already are so deep in terms of the midfield position. Well, they're pretty much now adding more fire to the field in terms of the depth chart in the midfield position, as they signed Romanian midfielder Alexandru Matan this past couple of days. And again, you know, when you look at this midfield for the Crew and the fact that they're just so stacked in terms of that position, I wonder, is this guy even going to get maybe playing minutes with this team because of how stacked the midfield is. And this is also the reason why I'm shocked NYCFC did not think about trying to acquire him, because it is pretty clear that if there is a team that really need Alexandru Matan, and a guy then that will definitely do good things to improve their midfield for this upcoming season, it's definitely going to be NYCFC rather than the Columbus Crew that is already have the deepest midfield in the league, with now adding even more fuel to the fire, as I mentioned, in terms of the midfield depth that they had this season. Now, DC United made a couple of signings these past couple of days by first signing Venezuelan young international forward Giovanni Bolívar, and then signing center back Brendan Hines-Ike from KV Krlik. I think that's how you pronounce. Again, anytime when there is a Danish club or a Scandinavian club or even a Baltic club, I usually have trouble in terms of pronouncing their club name. But either way, you know, DC is definitely finally started to make some signing, and I actually did look at the depth chart of DC for this upcoming season, and you know how I said before I was concerned about their attack, and I was worried that they do not have a lot of attackers, especially in that number 9 position. Well, it seemed like that is not going to be the case, because they actually, before signing Giovanni Bolívar, they actually have 4 players that is listed as a number 9 on this team, and now they have 5 players that's going to be listed as the forward after adding this guy, who I heard he's definitely a promising player coming out of South America, and you know, we'll see whether or not if he's going to get minutes of this team. And also, he's only 18 years too. But yeah, you know, when I look at this DC team, I will kind of start saying that maybe they seem pretty good heading into this upcoming season, and they don't have to worry about a specific position where they might be lack of depth in terms of that. However, my big concern with this DC team will remain on the fact that yes, you look like you have depth in terms of your roster on every single position, but it's all about whether or not if those guys that is on your roster, and especially the guy that is on the first list of the depth chart, is actually going to be performing for this DC team. Like, they really didn't improve a lot of their attack for this upcoming season, and for a team that desperately need some improvement on the attack, and they decide not to really do that, that definitely does bring me a little bit concerned of what's going to happen to this team, and especially how is this attack going to look after they didn't really do much to improve that during this offseason. Now, NYCFC have re-signed midfielder Gideon Zelayem to a new contract. Now, I'm kind of surprised that they decided to keep Zelayem to this team, because he is a guy that, remember when he was deemed to be a promising young prospect during his day with Sporting KC, and then injury kind of ruined that chance. Well, he did have a second chance with NYCFC, but he didn't really get a lot of playing time with the club, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that NYCFC is also very deep in terms of the midfield position. And I was thinking that, you know, with the team already seems pretty deep in the midfield position, he might think about going to another team, maybe around MLS, that could potentially get some playing time, so he can potentially fulfill that potential that he had a couple of years ago. But it seemed like that's not going to be the case. He's going to stay with NYCFC, and we'll see whether or not if he's going to get more minutes with this club, because it just does not make sense for him to decide to stay with NYCFC and decided to stay there, even though he's probably not going to get playing time for this upcoming season. Now, Nashville has re-signed defender Eric Miller, and I know a lot of people have not heard of this guy, mainly because this is another guy that usually don't get playing time with their respective MLS team. But the only difference between the Jadina Zelayem case compared to Eric Miller is that at least Miller is a versatile player, and when you're kind of low in the depth chart, but you are kind of a versatile player, there is definitely more chance that you could potentially get some playing time, and that, you know, in case if one of those the player in that back line for Nashville go down with an injury, they could potentially summon somebody that is lower in the depth chart, or if they don't have somebody lower in the depth chart, they can always look at other position that they might be very deep into their depth chart, and that some of those guys that is lower in the depth chart might be a little bit more versatile to play in the other position. And I think that's kind of what Eric Miller is, and that he could potentially play in a different position, not the position that he desired to do, in case if Nashville does have a bit of an injury crisis heading into this upcoming season in terms of their back line. Now, moving on, in terms of the next news, is that the Galaxy is close to signing French winger Samuel Grandeston from AS Monaco. And before you ask, no, this is not the replacement for Christian Pavone. But this seems like it's more of a replacement for Alexander Katar that they unfortunately lost last off season. Well, actually, it wasn't last off season, but it was the middle of last season, and we shall see how good he is going to fill that role. I mean, the last time when the Galaxy decided to sign a French winger and decided to sign him from one of the bigger club in League he turns out to be Roman Alessandrini, and turns out to be a very decent player for the Galaxy. So they're hoping that maybe Samuel is going to be kind of like that Roman Alessandrini kind of player, where, you know, right now they only sign him on a TAM contract, but if he turns out to be good, don't be surprised. He might potentially occupy one of the DP spot that the Galaxy currently have open right now. Now, finally, the last news for this news of the week involving the Vancouver Whitecaps, who, you know, I talked about before. There were rumors that they were going to be playing their home games and start their season in Utah. Well, that rumor is pretty much true. And even though there wasn't actually an official announcement that they were going to be playing in Utah and they were going to be playing at Rio Tinto Stadium as their temporary home to start the MLS season, it was pretty much confirmed when I look at the season opener. And as soon as I saw the Whitecaps play against the Portland Timbers for their season home opener and saw them playing at Rio Tinto Stadium, it pretty much confirmed that they are indeed going to be playing in Utah. And that, yeah, we shall see how they're going to do. I mean, last season when they were playing at home and playing at Providence Park, they kind of have an okay record at Providence Park. And I know for these Canadian team, it must be tough that not only they aren't able to play in their home market, but their home field advantage is now just kind of a neutral venue that most likely is not going to have any fans in attendance. And that's got to be tough for a lot of these Canadian team to play a home game in an unfamiliar market and playing in a neutral venue, and you don't even have fans that will of course push you to get a victory at home, compared to most of these MLS team that has started to open up their stadium and started to allow fans in their home venue. But as I said before, I really hope the Canadian team eventually is going to get a chance to play in their home market, but obviously that most likely is not going to happen unless if the Canadian government decide to open the border, and that is really kind of the only way I can see the Canadian team get a chance to play in their home market for this upcoming season. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for this week's edition of News of the Week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all these news? And as always, if there's any news I didn't mention here on the board, let me know in the comments below. But till then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.